This video I want to go through our basic operations review and specifically kind of look at some of the questions where students tend to struggle the most. There are other support resources available depending on what you struggle with, but that should all be posted in Google Classroom for you. I'm going to kind of skip over the adding of positives. I think most students are doing okay with that. Once we get into negatives, that's when people start getting thrown off. So if we're adding a negative number, that's the same as doing subtraction. So this is basically the same as 2 minus 6. And if we want to think about this from a number line perspective, this is where we start, and then the second half, this is what we do. So if we start at 2, subtract 6, that means we're going to be going left on the number line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to negative 4. So this would be negative 4. We could do the similar kind of thing here. This just means that we're starting at a negative, so we would be at negative 3 and adding 5. So if I start here and then do addition, I'm just adding. That means I'm getting larger, 3, 4, 5. We would end up at 2. Again, once we get into these last two problems, this is where students get thrown off a little bit again. So if we look at number 7, I'm starting at negative 8. If I add a negative 8 to that, that means I'm just continuing to go backwards further. I started at negative 8. If I'm looking at my number line, that would be kind of somewhere over here, negative 8. If I add another negative 8, I would go 8 more, I would end up at negative 16. And then similarly here, I'd end up at negative 15. Okay, so these are ones that students tend to struggle with a little bit. Moving on to subtraction, let me just bring our number line down here with us in case we need that again. Students generally do okay with basic subtraction. Sometimes going into the negatives throws us off a little bit. So this would be starting at 2 and then subtracting 5. So we would end up 2, 3, 4, 5. We would end up at negative 3 here. And then there's that double negative. This is another one that tends to throw people off. So I'm starting at 4. So we're starting here, but then I'm subtracting a negative. So if I'm just doing a regular subtraction, that means I'm getting smaller like we did here. I'm going to the left, getting smaller. 2, 3, 4, 5. If I subtract a negative, then we can't be going in the same direction. This is getting larger. So if I subtract a negative number, just like we've got there, subtracting a negative, that's the same as adding a positive. This is the same as 4 plus 7. So that means we end up at 11. Sometimes if we go down to these last few, so starting with a negative and then subtracting a negative, we got to be a little bit careful there. So this becomes negative 2 plus 7, okay? Because the front number doesn't change. We still start at negative 2, but if I'm subtracting a negative 7, that's the same as adding 7. So we would be at negative 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, we would end up at positive 5. When we get into multiplication, I really highly recommend that students memorize their multiplication tables up at least through 10. 12 is ideal. That just makes everything a whole lot quicker. Otherwise, you can do some form of counting or grouping. We talked about a couple different strategies in class. So just look at this, for example, 3 times 8. I need 8 plus 8 plus 8. Multiplication is just repeated addition. So I can do it that way, or I could do 3 8 times. I would have to have 8 of those, but we'll end up at the same answer. So for this, 8 plus 8 is 16, and then another 8. If you need to count on your fingers, that's fine. Okay, but that's how we multiply. And you can think of the numbers and the signs separately if you want. You just need to remember if there's a single negative sign, your answer is always going to end up negative. And then if there's two negatives being multiplied together, your answer is always going to be positive. So for example, if we look back to this number 19, 5 times 4 is 20. But since up above that 4 is negative, this would be a negative 20. And then down here at 24, 8 times 6 is 48. And since both of these numbers are negative, we're still going to end up with a positive 48. Another thing that people sometimes do with multiplication, so we can kind of do what we did over here with this problem. So if I'm thinking about 4 times 6, I need a total of 6 4s. So 4 plus 4 is 8, plus another 4 is 12. So that's 12. And 6 of them would just be 4 more, which is another 12. So the total has to be 24. So sometimes breaking it up into those pieces can be helpful. And since that 6 here is a negative, our final answer would be a negative 24 on that problem. Division, if you can do multiplication, you can do division. And the same exact rules apply with signs. If we have one negative sign, like we do here, 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 and here, your final answer is going to be negative. If you have two negatives, your final answer is going to be positive, just like with multiplication. And for most students who struggle with division, it's easiest to think of it as multiplication. So let's just think about this problem 26 here. So I've got 15 divided by 3, so you can either just think of, well, 3 times what number gives me 15, because that would really be what's going on. I've got how many groups of 3 will give me 15, and that is 5. So 15 divided by 3 is 5. Or another way that people go about a problem like this is to just say, well, how many 3s do I need to get up to 15? So 3, 6, 9, plus another one would be 12, plus another one would be not 15. Well, I'm adding that fifth 3, and that would be 15. So since I had to add 3 together 5 times to get 15, that gives me my answer again, where 15 divided by 3 is 5. So a couple different ways to approach it. If you didn't like this, I've got some resources posted as well, and then there's practice too. So a couple different quizzes practices, and then a multiplication tables practice. So if you need anything additional help, please let me know.